Today we'll be talking about building community and advisory groups. And by no means am I like the final commentator on this. In no way am I the expert. Many of you might be working on advisory groups already, creating them, participating on them, helping navigate them. I know, shout out to a couple of our vistas in the office that I currently work in, Kyra and Grace. Grace is working on a advisory group with Montana University System Mental Health Task Force. So like I said, this conversation is really to get you guys thinking about the importance of community advisory groups and to give you some tools on preparing an advisory group and what it can really give to your organization. And some of you know just as well as I do the impact that has. And so I would encourage you after this call or in the future to reach out to your fellow AmeriCorps members that might be working on advisory groups to pick their brain as well. All right, so if there's no comments or questions, I'm just going to jump right into our presentation today. So. Right. Okay. So hopefully, I think I'm sharing. There we go. Alrighty, so building community advisory groups with the quintessential mountain background for Montana. So today, what we hope to accomplish, and I actually have a special guest that will be joining me at about 15 minutes to the hour, and really excited about that. But until that point, we're gonna go push through some of this content, and hopefully we'll have enough time for questions at the very end. But so the contents, as you can read, obviously. So our learning objectives here are when to form an advisory group, how to form one, the phases of preparation for an advisory group, common obstacles you might face in group dynamics, and then what it looks like to conduct successful meetings, create bylaws, and sustain engagement in your advisory groups. So quick overview. This is pretty boilerplate for community advisory groups. Group of community members pulled together to advise your organization or initiative by looking at a problem, coming up with ideas about what can be done, and then creating and implementing an action plan. And I want to stress that last portion, which is to create and implement an action plan. So, right, the purpose isn't to, in some ways, an advisory group will give you the ability to collect a lot of data and good feedback, but what is the actionable step? What are you going to do with that information? So my first question to all of you is, who's working on an advisory group or a project that requires stakeholder input at this time? Maybe you're working on as a participant in a group, or you're working on creating the group itself. You can put it in, feel free to throw it in the chat. As a response, you can unmute yourself too if you'd like. Up to you. I have my chat pulled up. So is anyone working on in any capacity with advisory groups right now? Maybe you can just name them. Eamon says public history of COVID-19. It's very interesting. Probably has to do a lot with building an assessment and kind of generating, like you said, the history of COVID-19 requires a lot of input. Hillary says, I've been developing facilitating oversight board at the UM Food Pantry. Awesome. Substance Abuse Connection Coalition by Sophie. Very nice. I love how all these names, so a community advisory group is just one term, right? For these kind of coming together of individuals to provide feedback and direction for an organization or a project. So a coalition, great other name to be used, a subcommittee, Missoula Refugee Education Subcommittee, very nice. Natalia. And is that with soft landing maybe? Great to hear. And so I'm just going to move on, but think about that. Now that you've seen that some of your other AmeriCorps members have also been working in that capacity. Okay, so why are we going to produce, or why are we going to create a community advisory group? What's the incentive? So here I teased out 5 kind of key points to why we want to create advisory groups. One is it provides insight to the organization or the project that's invaluable. It helps you align your mission and vision with your projects and your outcomes. So advisory groups will always work within the confines of your mission and vision, driving your organization. And so the way you produce them can help you really align your goals and objectives. It increases the bandwidth of your organization. A lot of you know this, being AmeriCorps members and VISTA members, you're building capacity. So that's why you'll see a lot of VISTA members placed in positions where they can develop advisory groups, because it is a bandwidth thing. It's a capacity thing, or lack thereof, for organizations. And so the more kind of, lack of a better term, free labor you can get out of your advisory groups can go a long way with cash-strapped organizations. It also builds sustainability models into your organization. So having advisory groups can really kind of nest your goals and your objectives more sustainably within your organization. And then it creates legitimacy, not only outside, but internally within your organization. So the individuals that the advisory group ends up working with, the people that are on the advisory group, hopefully they're members of the community. Other community members see that. They see that an organization is working to implement an advisory group within their community, and they're not just taking for granted the information coming from out of those communities. It also produces legitimacy with funders. If funders can see that you've maintained quality feedback loops through advisory groups, they're more apt to potentially fund your projects and so on. So I'm going to ask Eli to bring up the poll for this question. I just want to get a gauge for you all on what is the most compelling reason to form an advisory group from this list of 5, or maybe if you have a differing opinion or an additional why, you can throw it in the chat, but I'd let you to give your opinion in the poll right here.
Put together in like 4 weeks and rolled out.
So hopefully that's up and running, and I'll just let Eli know when to close it off.
So I suppose that doesn't apply to the conversation.
Yeah, give it another maybe 10, 15 seconds here. So
okay,
get your responses in, and then we'll see what everyone had to say.
Great, thank you. Right. It's awesome. Great. Appreciate the responses, everyone. And looks like there's a pretty good spread. Not so many people think of bandwidth. I would agree that although that is an important factor, it is probably the least important of the 5. I personally voted for legitimacy. That's just my own opinion, but does anyone want to weigh in on why they might have voted sustainability as the number 1, since that seems to be the most relevant one to this group? You can unmic yourself, or you can throw it in the chat.
I'll unmic myself. I see sustainability is actually being almost like more powerful than legitimacy, because if you have legitimacy, then you're more likely to be able to be sustainable. And so I feel like legitimacy feeds into sustainability instead of sustainability feeding into legitimacy.
It's a great point, Connie. Thank you. And yeah, sustainability and legitimacy, they can kind of play off of each other. And if you have a sustainable model that really is engaging the community, that's what's producing the legitimacy in your organization. So great point. Hillary says, I think it's important to have a system in place that can survive with rotating membership. And that's an excellent point for AmeriCorps members to consider, is that sustainable models for, and this is hopefully what will help you create, is that the sustainable model for community advisory groups is extremely important. What are the back end systems that you're creating so that the person who moves into your role can help facilitate that new advisory group? All right. We'll close our poll here. So some examples of community advisory groups. I'm gonna move my thing here. So one example comes, I work at the Montana University System, the offices of the Commissioner of Higher Ed. And so we have a board of directors that oversees the Montana University System. And although they're not kind of like a traditional advisory group, they are a board of directors and they act as a kind of vision and directing authority for the Montana University System. And so the Board of Regents, it includes the individuals pictured here. There's 6 standing members and then the student representative in the middle here. And I'm just going to quickly read through what each of their role, like not what their roles are in the advisory group, but where they come from what background and what career they're working in now, to kind of give you a sense of the diversity that is sought out on advisory groups. So the first individual is Joyce Dabrowski. She's a chief health executive for the Montana service area. The chair, Kwesi Lozar, is a Federal Reserve Bank of Minneapolis vice president. Brianne Rogers is a Montana chief of staff and entrepreneur. Robert Nystuen is a banker and avid committee member. We have an attorney on the group, a development corporation nonprofit president, and then the student region is an accounting math student who works in machining. So there's a broad range of expertise and individuality on that board, and that's kind of what you're going to want to seek out in your advisory groups. So then we go to another example, which is an advisory committee. So an example of these is the Fish, Wildlife, and Parks of Montana. They maintain 7 different citizen committees. And so the citizen committees are established when a citizen they have to apply to be a part of the committee, and then they help FWP put forth citizen-centric visions of what FWP can accomplish. And so they have 7 committees in 7 regions. So that's a pretty well-established committee group. The Food, Drug, and Administration, FDA, they also hold committees as well. And according to the McKinsey Center for Government, the FDA approves nearly 88% of activities endorsed by its advisory committee, and they don't approve nearly 86% of those that they don't endorse. So you can see that I put up here, enabled advisory groups are powerful tools. So when you're listening, if the FDA is listening to its advisory committees, I don't think you're above also creating and listening to advisory committees and taking their suggestions. That's a pretty high endorsement rate, 88%. The third one I want to touch on is coordinating councils. So I work for the Gear Up program. My logo here is a little bit backwards, but the Gear Up program helps students achieve college access and success. And so each school has its own Gear Up team, and we call them a coordinating council. And on that team is a parent, a student, a teacher, liaison, and administrator, so that we can get a well-rounded view of what services are working, what we need to do more of, what we need to do less of. And they operate as a think tank, feedback, and guidance mechanism for us. And then finally, our special guest is going to be talking on this topic, but you could also have a task force. That's another term, or coalition, if you will. And the Montana University System Healthy Fall Task Force, I don't know if some of you who might be working in higher ed or education might have heard about this. Essentially, in order to go back to school in an appropriate way, an advisory committee or advisory group called the Healthy Fall Task Force was created in order to give recommendations to universities and campuses on how to appropriately and safely go back to school. And so we'll have our guests speak about that later on in this conversation. And task force, they usually work on broad issues that affect many organizations at once and help set standards and such. Any questions about this so far? I'm going to be running through, and so Eli tipped me off to kind of the progression of development of advisory groups that we've been looking at. And so the first step is preparation, second is execution, the last is evaluation. So that's how I've presented my material today. So here we have, I want to start with a riddle because I think I'm going to point out something from it, but does anyone have an answer to this riddle? It says, a container without hinges, key, or lid, yet golden treasure inside is hid. What is it? And if you're a certain buff of this this movie series, you'll get this immediately. Yeah. Yes, correct. Sophie, Bella, Eileen, Kyra, all correct. Yeah, this is obviously from The Hobbit. So no credit taken on my end. Correct, Sam, yeah. X's. Yeah, I remember screaming that. But the riddle is just to say that, okay, you all got it right, but some people might have answered it differently. And it's just to point out that when you're doing community needs assessments, you can't always hang your hat on the first instinct answer you have to the question of what the community needs or what the answer to the problem in the community is. You might get misled and run down a wrong road. So you really got to be smart about your approach to community needs assessments and especially you want to take in the voices of the community before you make any plans moving forward. So good job on that, guys. So preparation is probably the most important fact. And if any of your analysis fails these categories, you may need to reconsider the need for your committee. And what I wanted to point out, I guess, in this, bring up my little laser point, in this part right here is that indeed, all of these steps are actually essential in the development of the advisory group itself. So at no point, although we're working in the advisory group bubble here for community need, we're still having to assess community need, build awareness for the advisory group, plan and execute, right? And evaluate the success of the advisory group. So if you can look at this kind of like progression of CBI as also applying directly within the bubble of advisory groups, I think that's a huge takeaway from this lesson. And then continuing on, we have need. So definitely you want to conduct research, reports, canvass the community and understand past initiatives that may or may not have failed and to understand why. Why are, one of the comments in the chat was, you're kind of reinstating this advisory group. Well, why did it go away in the first place? Were there conflicts? Were there monetary issues? Was there not enough buy-in? What was the situation and how do you rectify that moving forward? You want to consider costs, costs of recruiting, supporting, rewarding participants, costs of people's time mostly, and general costs funding the project. But usually advisory groups are staffed with volunteers, and the only kind of financial burden there is to maybe build in some incentives for participation. Time is extremely important. Is now a good time for the advisory group? Maybe there's not enough buy-in in the community yet. Maybe you need to start at assessment and building awareness first before you're starting the advisory group. And then time for development. We'll touch on a timeline later, but real briefly, it takes about a year to really get an advisory group up and running and with the correct buy-in. And then we have scale, which is how complex is the project to be undertaken. It could be with that you need to work with other organizations cross collaboratively to create an advisory group between the two of you, because the problem and the project is too complex for your one organization. And then you want to build in a level of expertise to compete for change, right? So if you don't have somebody who's an expert on that, on the project that you're trying to run, you're going to suffer a little bit. And then obviously you all know capacity. What is the current climate and capabilities of your organization to accomplish this? So really, this is the assessment phase of should you and build an advisory group, and what are the considerations? All right, preparation, part 2. So what kind of structure are we looking at for an advisory group? Is it a long-term or standing advisory group? Are they going to have to, is this going to go on for multiple years, or is it a short-term ad hoc one? That will really determine who you want to invite and what the expectations of those individuals are. So don't just assume that, really build out a timeline of project outcomes that you want to see and really stick to that. Size is very critical. Group dynamics, as we'll touch in later, is extremely important when it comes to advisory groups, and size is a critical component of that. You got to make sure, I think, like the reason the Army is built the way it is and has the kind of ladders of hierarchy that it does is it's set on actually researched information regarding how people respond and in what size of groups and how they can form connection with those individuals in their group. So you see that 20 can be a really good size, but 50 might be way too much for an advisory group. You want to start thinking about your goals and objectives prior to the entire group coming together, especially if you're the one creating the advisory group. Generating organizational buy-in, and then you want to prepare a loose budget that you'll run through with your advisory group once it's been created. And then you want to define the roles prior to filling them. So defining your role. Are you the leader of the advisory group? Are you the facilitator, or are you the mediator? So all of those roles do a little bit different things in descending order. So if you're the leader, there's the most responsibility in communication and administration, whereas facilitator, you're kind of working to bring people together, and the mediator is maybe like a third, like a back end or behind the scenes worker. Picking up a lot of background noise. Oh yeah, sorry everyone. I work in a cubicle, in a world of cubicles, and so people are chatting all around me. So I apologize if my mic is being interrupted sometimes. Hopefully that's not too much of an issue. Let me know if it becomes too irritating. All right. So we got about 15 or 20 minutes before our next guest arrives, and I just wanted to touch on our team. So staffing and recruitment of your advisory groups. You can read obviously, but really what you want to do is create position analysis and position descriptions so that everyone knows their role when coming into the advisory group. You can do this by creating a matrix of skills and knowledge needed to meet objectives. And really here you're kind of almost acting like an HR manager in the way that you're preparing a recruitment ad essentially for individuals you want to bring on, right? It's not just a phone call. It's not just an email. Maybe you want to spruce things up and make it this formal invite and a formal kind of like, this is why we're seeking you out, because you have these skills, and because you have these skills and they meet our matrix, we want you on our team. Share the position description with any candidates. Really broaden your net. Consider those most affected by the problems you hope to solve first and incorporate them into your advisory group. And then interview potential candidates to gauge their relevance, interest, and commitment. So not everyone's going to want to join, right? Even if they're the perfect person for the job, they might already have a large commitment, and they're not going to put forth as much energy to the program, which is totally acceptable for them, but you just know now that that's not going to work for you. You want a mix of formal and informal leaders as well. Sometimes advisory groups can be overstacked with professionals. And this can have a double-edged sword. One, you have expertise on your team, but it also makes individuals who don't have formal education or expertise feel a little bit less competent in the group. And you want to be able to have a mixed dynamic. And then really consider who's missing at the table, right? That's probably the most important question with advisory groups, because the whole purpose of an advisory group is to bring in voices that would otherwise go unheard. All right, roles and responsibilities for your team. You want to clearly define roles so that people can have actionable steps. There's nothing more frustrating than being in an advisory group and wondering what your purpose there is. It might look good on your resume down the road, but can you really quantify and qualify what you did in the advisory group? So you want to make sure that everyone is on board with their role. Make every position visible, and that's just to say that you want everyone to feel like they have an important role to play. Definitely consider appointing a chair and a co-chair. That way they can funnel committee decisions up to the chair and the co-chair. They can deliberate, and then they can be your spokesperson, much like a union rep would be for workers' rights. And then identify key support activities done by individuals outside the group. So this could be your support staff. I know, for example, my guest speaker is going to be helping me out with this. I identified him as a key support activity for this presentation because he has relevant experience that will help teach this concept to you guys. All right, accountability is huge on teams, as you all know. You want to create an actual accountability document and have it signed by group members. So this is kind of where you can become creative and create your own accountability document. We'll talk about bylaws a little bit later. So create a clear participation expectation, name some consequences up front for poor participation, and obviously we're not going to tolerate inappropriate behavior, but we want to be able to define what that is, because simply putting your input, whether it's a dissenting viewpoint or not, is not an inappropriate behavior, but there are certain ones that we need to identify. And then always keep the group information confidential unless you're making reports outside of the group. All right, so that brings us to bylaws. Bylaws are the kind of the systems that you create that govern the roles and the responsibilities and the kind of like interactions between group members. And so the bylaws, you can create a statement of mission, vision, purpose specific to the advisory group. How long will the advisory group exist? Maybe there's an undefined duration, but you want to at least give them a sense of how long you're going to be expected to participate in the group. Guidelines for membership and termination. What does it take to be a member? What are the expectations, and what are the expectations, or what are the terms under which you would be terminated? And then you have mechanism for establishing success and disbanding the group. That's kind of like your evaluation step. At what point do you decide we've met our outcomes? Let's disband. And then here you can also create group norms and group norms of interactions. So my question to you all, is there any other ideas or any other components of bylaws that you would want to put in to help govern your advisory group? You can throw it in the chat if you have any ideas. And I'm just going to move on for time's sake. But compensation. Yeah, if there's a compensation, if there is a need to compensate advisory group members, that's something you would definitely want to consider in there. If you have the means to compensate, that's great. Grace says a human resource element. Very good. Yep. Like, what are the what are the steps to report inappropriate behavior or to substantiate some sort of claim against the group. HR twice, very good, thank you. Methods for adding new bylaws. Yeah, maybe you need a bylaw for making bylaws. This isn't, right, like once you establish bylaw, you don't want to keep adding things without the other members knowing and without their input. So that's a great point. Okay, so the onboarding process for new members, you want to create training opportunities for them to learn about the problem and the bylaws. Establish transparency of goals and plan a distribution of work, like I said earlier, and then give them a chance for the orientation. So set aside like a day or two. I know all of you, excuse me, have gone through some sort of orientation for AmeriCorps. Whether that was helpful or not is up to you to decide, but maybe you can take away from there how you would improve it at an orientation experience for an advisory group. And then culture, of course, is a huge component. I saw this, it was a kind of a funny cartoon. So group dynamics and potential obstacles within group dynamic. This is probably where you're going to see the greatest potential for setbacks in your advisory group is the compatibility of group members. But in a professional, formal advisory group, it's okay to have dissenting opinions. And this isn't your Facebook feed. You're just going to get all the information that confirms what you believe. This isn't an ego game. It's about creating lasting change for the community that you're targeting to serve. So ideological conflicts, interpersonal conflicts, manage them above water, okay? Interpersonal, you may have conflicts with how the organization is running, but you're more than welcome to voice those concerns. If you're a committee member, you have that right. Some other setbacks might be if you don't have an unclear purpose as to why you're doing the advisory group, and or if you have brand competition. So what that kind of looks like is, say somebody else in the realm that you're working is also building an advisory group. You don't want to compete for their space in that area, right? You want to work together. All right, so after the preparation phase, we have execution. Communication is probably the most important aspect of a successful advisory group, in that it enables everyone to be on the same page, and it's super overlooked, right? Like we always throw around the term communication. I do great. I got a comm degree. What does it actually mean to be in good communication with somebody? And really consider that. You can use Microsoft Teams, you can use email, public interfaces, draft agendas that you want to send out. You want to keep people appraised of all information coming out in advance of your asks, because if they think something's coming from left field, they're less likely to participate. Your meetings, trying to keep them pretty limited. Obviously, they'll be virtual, I would think, for the most part at this point. You want to throw in icebreakers, definitely do a meeting scheduler so you can see times that work for everyone. And then make sure somebody is responsible for taking meeting notes and developing the actions and next steps. Like I said, nothing more frustrating than walking away from a group meeting and being like, what did we just accomplish? This will give them an idea of what was accomplished. And then now that we're, online infrastructure is really important for getting your word out. So how do you want to leverage Facebook, Twitter, as a means to disseminate information coming out of your advisory group? And then at the end, you want to always regular maintenance. Reevaluation is the process of reassessing who's at the table, revisiting your bylaws, like was commented earlier by Blake, and then updating communication strategies. So, right, like you're not going to have all the solutions planned out prior to execution phase, but you can build in systems of reevaluation that give opportunities to participants to exit or join the advisory group. So why are we doing this? We're doing it for the stakeholders, and really what I'm going to highlight in the stakeholder section is the clients that you're serving through the advisory group. So making relationships central, right? You might want to create a client committee, a committee within a committee where the advisory group gains information from. Now you probably want clients on your advisory group, but if you've already had all the participants you want on there, then you might consider creating a small external committee that can advise the advisory group. I know it sounds kind of strange, but just better feedback, more information. So field work with clients, you want to get in the weeds. I know Vista's members don't always get the chance to work directly with their clients, but maybe you have somebody on your advisory team who can, and so making touches directly with them as you move through the advisory process is important. Prepare for opposition. I know that sounds strange, but not all of your recommendations from your advisory group or the problem that you're trying to solve will be well received by everyone in the community. And it's important to bring those voices in too, right? You're preparing for opposition, not to squash them, but to kind of invite them in some sense to the table to see what position they hold and why they hold it. Especially if you're in an advisory group where you think the mission is very clearly positive. And then I would encourage you to create a money map. And you might ask, oh, what's a money map? I don't really even know what a money map is. I just made up the term, but really what I'm considering in that realm is, where are the funds from? Maybe you have funds for your advisory group. Where are they going, and what impact are they having? And you can essentially create a map, a physical map of Montana, and like draw lines between your organization and the place where the money ends up going. And then you can see these, well, we're building resources here and here, but not here. Are our resources in this area of the map, are they performing as we expected them to? And if not, can we reallocate them somewhere else? And then always want to communicate with them in a timely way. All right, then we have our timeline. So like I said, it takes almost a good year to get this thing going. So the assessment of need takes about 2 to 4 months. And this is my own approach. You can maybe hustle through this. It depends on how the buy-in of your organization. But this is kind of a quick timeline to look at to see, how long will it take me to build a team? I mean, with a 10-person team, it will definitely take you at least 3 months to identify the appropriate people and to get them on board and to get them trained and oriented and so forth. And so, and then you want to execute your objectives and evaluate and engage. So the last 2 slides, I'll just run through real quick, and then we'll invite our Dr. Brock Testman to speak. I don't know if he joined us quite yet, but he should be here any minute. All right, so our evaluation, assessment instruments to kind of evaluate your success. You want to create a data collection system. Maybe you already have one in your organization, but a data collection system, I mean, this could be an Excel sheet, right? Like, how are you tracking the information? It doesn't have to be something fancy, although you might have something fancy in mind. Surveys to clients served to generate feedback, maybe a survey, internal survey for your advisory group, participant feedback forms for your advisory group, and then a skills assessment of the individuals on your board. So a skills assessment just allows the advisory group participant to tell you what they're good at and how, and then you can use that information to plug them in a meaningful way. Some benchmarks, how you track success, numeric analysis, obviously, that's like the Excel sheets. I served 100 students, 60 of them got the message or something like that. And then the other ones are looking through a lens of privilege, right? Like class analysis, how is what I'm doing affecting the socioeconomic ladder? How is it affecting minority populations? and how is it affecting the gender biases that we have in our culture. And so those lenses, and they're not as complicated as you might think. It's just taking a critical lens to those components of analysis, so that when you're managing for success, you're having those minority groups and constituents in mind. 2 more minutes here and then we'll drop it off. Telling your story. So data visualization. I love data visualization. You can use Canva, which is a really easy tool. There's some other easy tools to create quick graphs. People like visuals. And so I would really encourage you that if once you collect information, that you put it into a eye-catching way. You can read the rest as you please. And then some member engagement. You want to keep people engaged, right? For volunteers, that's what is going to be on your team mostly, is volunteers. So you want to recognize, respect, define roles, reward them, and then post to them results. Like, volunteers are there to serve, but they want to know that their services are having an impact. So you want to share with them the evaluation materials that you generate. Growing the network for, you want to give volunteers the opportunity to network with each other and outside of the group. Just kind of building the proposition to join, right? Like, here are the benefits. You want to send thank you messages and give them public recognition overall. And then you will experience turnover. There's a, you know, is the people on your team truly representative of the population you want to serve? Maybe people need additional responsibilities. Maybe they're feeling a little like they could produce more. And then you want to track their time and effort so that you can relate to them. Hey, look, you've given nearly 25 hours to this advisory group and you've contributed these things. That's fantastic. And we really appreciate that. We don't have time for the scenario, but you're welcome to run this on your own with your groups if you want some time. And I'm gonna end sharing for a second and see, shout out to Dr. Brock Testman, who I see is on the call right now. And I just wanted to give a quick introduction. Mr. Testman is the Deputy Commissioner of Academic Research and Student Affairs at the Office of Commissioner of Higher Ed. And like I mentioned earlier, he is kind of the guiding force, although not the exact creator of the task force for Healthy Farm Task Force, but he is the lead on that. And I wanted to give him the opportunity to share with you all on how that process went and how that was developed. So from the recruitment phase to the action plan, we're going to see how that task force was created. So welcome, Brock, and thank you for joining us.
Yeah, you got it, Sam. Hey, everybody. It's nice I can see mostly names here. I have some names I recognize, at least a few of them, and then some new folks. So glad to meet all of you. And Sam, thanks for the opportunity. Let me just confirm a couple details with you, Sam. So are you looking for what, about 10 minutes here, 5 to 10 minutes?
Yep, that'd be great. 10 minutes would be great.
10 minutes. Okay, great. And I didn't see your presentation from the beginning. I did look through the slides, and then I've caught the last 5-7 minutes or so. I can tell you, I mean, whether it was by your design or not, probably some of what I'm about to talk about with respect to the Healthy Fall Task Force will line up really neatly with what you've presented. And then some of it may not line up all that neatly. I just noticed there were a few things where I was like, I'm not sure that that's exactly the thought process I used. So just take it for what it's worth. I suppose if I had to make one summary statement here, it's that having been involved with and chaired now a large number, I mean, I guess probably I could even say been involved with dozens of advisory committees. There is no one size fits all or one process fits all. And I guess that would certainly be the case for the MUS Healthy Fall Task Force. I'll walk you through, our thinking in 3 areas. And Sam asked me to talk a little bit about the formation of the task force, so kind of recruiting members and how that worked. He asked me to talk a little bit about how he decided what to focus on. And then he asked me to talk a little bit about how we have measured success. So I'll do those things in turn. I don't expect that all of you will know what the MUS Healthy Fall Task Force is at all. In fact, I'd be surprised if many of you did. But it is a system-wide task force. And by system, I mean the Montana University system, all of our campuses. We have 8 kind of statutorily defined campuses. In reality, we have more, but for example, in Bozeman, Garetson College and MSU Bozeman are considered a single campus. So we have 8 of those statutory campuses. And as we worked through the crisis of March and April and just the immediate response to the coronavirus outbreak, we also realized we had to plan a little bit for the future, because just as you need to manage the day-to-day of your organization, you also need to think about what's next. And immediately we started to understand that we would have serious questions to answer with respect to how we would plan for the fall semester and beyond. So in April, believe it or not, in early April, I was charged by my boss, the Commissioner of Higher Education, to chair a task force that would establish planning guidelines for the fall semester. And there's an important word in there, which is guidelines. Our goal as a task force was not to plan at a granular level the day-to-day operations of all of our different campuses. First of all, that would be impossible for us to do on our own. And second of all, you know, our campuses know their own situation best. In almost every circumstance, it's our campuses that know what fit their culture, their student body, their physical environment. And we knew that we couldn't form a centrally located kind of task force that would actually build out the plans. We did, however, want to build planning guidelines. So that was our charge. And I guess that leads to the first important point I'd like to make, which is that the way in which you recruit for a task force, in my opinion, depends very much on the essence of your mission. For example, you know, if you are forming an advisory committee around hiring a new campus president or chancellor, that's a certain kind of mission. If you have an advisory group around career and technical education in the state of Montana, that's a different mission. And then certainly we knew our mission was to think about what had to be in place for students and faculty and staff to come back to campus in the fall. We took that as our mission. And I think that guides to a great extent how you build out your team, and just very carefully thinking about what your mission is. Another factor to consider, though, is certainly the timeline that you're operating on. We had about 5 weeks to put together our planning guidelines, a little bit more. So Sam, that's the one thing I heard you talk at the end of your presentation about the time that it takes to build a community advisory group. And I think you're spot on, especially if you know this is a long-term group. It's not an ad hoc. It's going to be a standing advisory committee. It's tackling a complex problem that will unfold over maybe decades rather than months or years. Then I think that is a sensible time frame. We had about 5 weeks. So time was of the essence. That influenced my thinking because I knew that we had to keep the group fairly small. Otherwise, we were not going to be able to move quickly. And then the last thing that you would all want to consider is just, are there statutory or, you know, local, state, or federal level requirements with respect to how you put your committee together? We did not have that in this case. So as chair of the Healthy Fall Task Force, I knew we had to move quickly. I knew our mission was to build out system-wide planning guidelines. And then I knew that we didn't have any kind of the statutory requirements in terms of how we pulled things together. So I thought, gosh, the first thing we need to do, since we're leaving the details to the campuses, we got to make sure the campuses are represented on this task force. And so that's what I did. We had 12 members. I said I wanted to keep us small so we can make decisions quickly. We knew we'd be operating in a Zoom environment like this. So I wanted it to be small enough where people could still participate. We could see each other and have our video on and really feel like we were working together. And from that point on, I would say that there's some art involved in building an effective advisory committee. I've been working in the Montana University system now for about 6 years. So I've built a lot of relationships, and I've developed some good assessments of who is able to rise to a challenge, move quickly, work well as part of a team. And I kind of reached out to many of those folks first. Again, keeping in mind that we needed representation from all of our campuses. And we did. We got 12 members, including myself. The two large campuses, MSU Bozeman and UM Missoula, both had multiple representatives, one of whom was from their 2-year campus. And then I made sure to include a couple of additional representatives from our 2-year campuses. So of the 12 members, 1 was from the central office, 4 were from the 2-year campuses, and then 7 were from the 4-year campuses. And yeah, Sam, that's a good idea. Whether it's a mental repository of the good team players or something you actually put down on paper, building that list out is really good. A couple of other quick points on composition. Staffing is really important. And in order to free up advisory committee members to be full participatory members and to engage fully, you don't want to burden 1 or 2 or 3 members of a small group, especially with staffing duties. I know that may sound like a luxury, right? And it's not like you hire a full-time staffer, at least we weren't able to. But I, again, tapped into that list of resources from around our office and people I knew would rise to the challenge. And I picked two folks who were assigned just to staff the committee. So they weren't part of the committee, but they just supported the committee. And that was essential. It freed me up. It freed the committee members up to do the substantive work that we had been charged to do. The other thing at the outset, after we recruited members, and actually as part of the recruiting process, I really made it clear that it's understandable for most people to I guess, stand on a position based on where they sit with respect to that position. Kind of where you stand depends on where you sit. And that is, you can predict someone's position or role on a committee by looking at the position they occupy outside of that committee. And, so a student affairs officer would certainly, have that front and center. Academic affairs, likewise. A finance person, likewise. Keeping that in mind, I thought, all right, what is it that we're seeking to accomplish here? And I realized pretty quickly that we did want to build this environment around what it would take to mitigate risk and enhance quality for students and faculty and staff, especially on the academic side. So I built out that committee from our world of academic affairs and student affairs. It turns out we addressed a whole lot of issues outside of that scope, but I thought this committee needs to be built entirely of folks who think about that day in and day out, because that's at the heart of our mission. What it meant was that when we sat down to think about what our charge was, which is to set out these planning guidelines, we realized that maybe only 1/3 of the planning areas we had to deal with really related directly to student affairs or academic affairs. So there was a lot of work done on facilities, maintenance and safety of facilities. There was work done on research. There was work done on athletics. There was work done on campus safety. That's not anything we could answer on our own. And so my second big point, and I have my eye on the clock right now, my second big point is just to make sure that that group you bring together understands that it is not on an island. And then in fact, there will be some times that it's just that group and you really draw yourselves in, you're making hard decisions, it's very internal, but that group has to be easily expandable. You have to be able to stretch out and reach out to others beyond the advisory committee. Absolutely crucial. On the first day, the first meeting of the Healthy Fall Task Force, the first thing that each group member did is build out a list of anywhere from 20 to 80 people on their campus or in their campus community that they knew were going to be helpful resources as part of our planning. They reached out to them, let them know that they're going to be leaning on them. So instantly, we retained the smallness and flexibility of our little group, but we built ourselves out to a group that was actually functionally several hundred members strong. None of those other folks, misunderstood the situation. They knew they weren't going to have a vote or they weren't going to be at every meeting, but they became part of our planning process. And really, we planned in all of these areas by just asking ourselves, what is it that our colleges and universities do on a day-to-day basis? If our charge is to build guidelines that promote minimized risk and enhanced quality, well, risk and quality around what? What is it that our campuses do? So we asked those questions and we did come up with these 12 categories. And I mentioned some of them already. In the interest of time, I won't go back. But everything from delivering quality instruction to hosting community events to campus safety, like I said. And we built out a column of essential guidelines. These are questions that every campus would have to answer as they built out their plan. And then some sort of optional considerations. These are things we encouraged campuses to think about, but didn't require them to. Now I'll wrap up with my third point, which is measuring success. There are two ways to measure success, I think, with an advisory committee. One is procedural success. Like, did the group actually work the way that you expected it to? Did you meet deadlines? Did you do what you said you're going to do? And then the second one is kind of outcome-based success. I mean, was the quality of your work up to snuff? So procedurally, I think thus far, the Healthy Fall Task Force has been successful. We did have a very tight timeline for developing the guidelines, and we did. We met that deadline. It was about 5 weeks. Once we got the guidelines out, we knew that we would have to lobby the campuses to build out their own plans over the summer. And we had to stay on top of them with that, but they did, and they all submitted their plans and they moved forward with them. So that was an area of success. And then crucially, from a process standpoint, we knew that we would have to have a living document, guidelines that were updated over time. That was crucial for success because the situation's changed so much since April. That's not lost on any of you, you know that. So we have made it a living document. For example, in July, we amended the guidelines. So we adopted a mask requirement across all of our campuses. And that's obviously incredibly an important addition. So procedurally, it was success. I will just knock on wood, show you both fingers crossed and tell you that in terms of outcomes, so far, decent enough. I think one positive case on our campuses is too much, but we're taking it day by day. Our campuses are still open. Students, I think, are getting a high quality education, and where we can, I think we've succeeded in minimizing risk. So it's been a good experience. I know I'm out of time. Sam, thanks for giving me the opportunity and happy to come back. And Sam, certainly you can pass along my contact information if folks want to follow up at all. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much, Brock, for your expertise there. It's really invaluable to have somebody who literally just ran this with such a pertinent topic as well. And thank you, everyone, for being here. I don't know if Eli's going to sign you all off, but I'm happy to follow up with any of my presentation or give you contact information for Brock. I know that team did some incredible things pushing through kind of COVID guidelines in just a 5-week span, when in reality, those decisions usually take, half a year to complete. So thank you, Brock, again, and thank you all for being here.